Hey everyone, it's Chris. Welcome back to another tutorial in our Tetris tutorial series. This tutorial I've decided we're going to go ahead and optimize our user input controls. And to do that, we're going to allow the player to move the Tetramino piece left and right and down continuously without having to repeatedly press the key. So in this way, the player will be able to hold down the key and the piece will move continuously. There are a couple of things, of course, that we're going to have to do to make that work. One is that we're going to have to replace our, here, let's go ahead and jump into our Tetramino script. We're going to have to replace our getKeyDown methods of the input class with getKey method instead. Okay, the getKeyDown method is called only once per frame when the key is pressed. So if the getKeyDown method detects that the right arrow was pressed in that frame, it's not going to detect it again unless I let go of the key and press it again. So what we need in order for continuous movement to work is we need a different method, and that method is actually called getKey, which is called at every frame. Okay, so at every frame, if the right arrow is down, it's going to call this if statement every single time. So we're going to go ahead and replace getKeyDown with getKey. Okay, except for the up arrow, because the up arrow actually rotates our Tetramino, and we don't need continuous rotation. So we're going to leave that as getKeyDown. For the down arrow, though, we're going to need to change that to getKey. And we're also going to need to change it down here to getKey. All right, so let's save that. Let's have a look at our Tetris game now. So now if we hold down the left key, it just jumps to the left. Right key jumps to the right. Down key, just down. Okay. The problem that we're going to run into with this is that now if we press the right key once, the piece moves, that one just moved like 3 or 4 units at a time. Same thing if I press the left. It's completely out of control. It's moving way too fast for us to have any kind of positive gameplay experience. So what we need to do is we need to add some limitations in here to our controls to kind of tighten them up and make them better. And that's what we're going to do now. All right. So one of the things that we're going to need to do first is we need to control the rate of continuous movement. And by that I mean we need to specify some kind of interval that the piece should move when the button's held down. Kind of like when we were playing and we had only the option of actually moving the piece by repeatedly pressing the button. So what we want to do is we want to simulate something like that. We want to simulate us pressing the button while we're actually just holding the button down. Okay, and that can be achieved by having, let's see, we would need 2 variables. One, we would need a variable that would specify our maximum amount of time to wait before the next movement, and another variable that counts how much time has passed since the last movement so that we know when to move our piece next. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if we can add something like that into our user input method here. Okay, let's start with the right arrow. What we could do here is, you know what, let's go ahead and create our variables since we're going to need them here. And left and right and up and down, we're going to use 2 kinds of variables here because we want the down continuous movement to be just a little faster than a left and right, just to kind of mimic the original Tetris game a little more. So we'll do it that way. So let's go ahead and add just a few variables here. So we're going to create, and they're going to be private variables, and they're going to be floats. And we're going to call these, let's see here, we're going to do a continuous vertical speed. And that's going to be the rate, the interval between moves, okay, for the vertical moves. And that's the down, pressing the down arrow. So then we've got another one that we need to make, and that's going to be the continuous, oops, help if I can spell, continuous horizontal speed. And let's set that one to 0.1f. And the next variables we're going to need to create to help with these are also going to be floats, and they're going to be called vertical timer. And let's just go ahead and set that equal to 0. And horizontal timer. Okay. All right. So here's what we're going to do with these. In our user input, we're going to create an if statement. And this if statement, we're going to check if, let's see, this is the right arrow, right? So we're going to use our horizontal timer. If our horizontal timer is less than our continuous horizontal speed, then we want to increment our horizontal timer by time.delta time, and we want to return. Okay? So let me explain this before we move on. Basically, we're checking what our horizontal timer is. Okay? Our horizontal timer, the first time we check it, is going to be 0. And it's going to be less than our continuous horizontal speed because our continuous horizontal speed is set at 0.1f. So if it is less than our continuous horizontal speed, then our horizontal timer is going to be incremented by time.delta time. Okay? And then it's going to return. And return, what this does is it returns out of the method. Okay? So the return basically says, hey, only run this, but don't run anything else in this method. We're done. Don't do anything else in here. All right? So basically, the piece isn't going to move. This isn't going to happen if this timer doesn't reach anything greater or equal to than the continuous horizontal speed. So this line of code right here is actually going to produce our stepping that we're looking for when the piece moves left and right. So let's go ahead and just copy that and paste that into the if statement for the left arrow. Now that we've got that copied, there's actually one more thing that we should probably do, okay? And that is to actually reset our horizontal timer to 0, okay? And we set that to 0 after the if statement, okay? Because what happens is once we reach once the horizontal timer variable reaches the same value or greater than the continuous horizontal speed variable, we're going to not process the contents of the if statement, and we're basically going to say, hey, if this is less than this, oh, it's not, oh, we're just going to jump to the next line of code, so we're just going to move the piece. The problem with that is that we're not resetting the horizontal timer to 0. So once the horizontal timer reaches a greater than or equal to value to the continuous horizontal speed, it'll never ever run this if statement again because it'll never equal less than that again. So we have to set it to 0 after it's already been set. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So we've done that here and here. So now let's have a look and see what our game looks like. Okay, now you can see that the piece is behaving a little better. Right? It's a little more controlled now. It's not so completely out of whack. It's not moving like incredibly fast like the down arrow button does. So what we need to do is we need to also implement that in our down button. Okay. So let's go ahead and jump back into our script. And let's have a look at our down button. Get key down. Oh, that's up arrow. Get key down arrow. Okay. Same thing. What we want to do here is we want to say if vertical timer is less than continuous vertical speed, we want to increment the vertical timer by time.delta time. Oops. And we want to return. Otherwise, if we don't run the if statement, we want to go ahead and set our vertical timer equal to 0. Okay? So let's see what that looks like. See? That's a little better. Alright. So, we're not done yet. This actually may seem like we're done, but we're not. So let's talk about what is going on here still. When we press the button, sometimes nothing happens. And sometimes it moves more than once. The reason that happens is because what we're doing here is we're only allowing movement when our vertical timer is equal to, or our horizontal timer or our vertical timer are equal to their speeds. So that only happens if this timer is incremented enough. And that only happens when the key is held down long enough. So if the key isn't held down long enough, then the piece could potentially not move. And we don't want that to happen, even though what happens here is every time the button's pressed, the horizontal timer is still incremented, and at once when it reaches its continuous horizontal speed, then it actually moves, the timer's reset to 0, and everything seems to be working, but it's very buggy, it's not the right way to do it. Okay? One other thing that we can add in here to help along is we need to check on get key up, right? So we're going to do if input dot get key up key code dot right arrow, or input dot get key up key code dot left arrow, or input dot get key up key code dot down arrow. Okay. If we're basically get key up is when the player releases the key. So if the player releases the key, we want to reset our horizontal timer and our vertical timer, because we want to make sure that the actual timers get reset when the user releases the key, because we don't want that time to continuously add up every time the player presses the key, right? We want to reset that every time the key is released. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is we don't want the Tetramino piece to move immediately when the player presses the button. We want it to kind of have just a little bit of a delay and then move. Because we want to still be able to move our piece one unit at a time if we want, by pressing the arrow keys repeatedly, right? So we have to add something in that allows us to add sort of a delay, like, hey, I'm holding the button down, and I've been holding the button down for a specific amount of time, so now move the piece continuously. For that, yep, we're going to need more variables, so let's go ahead and add some. And actually, these are going to be very simple. We're going to add, let's make this private as well. It'll be a float. And we are going to call this one button down weight max. Okay. And we're going to assign this a value of 0.2f. And then we're going to create another private float. And we're going to name this one button down wait timer. And we're going to set it to 0. Okay. And let's add some descriptions here. So this is going to be the speed at which the tetramino will move when the down arrow, or not the down arrow, yeah, the down arrow, the down button is held down. Okay. And this will be the speed at which the tetramino will move when the left or right buttons are held down. And this is how long to wait before the tetramino recognizes that a button is being held down. Okay. And the timers, of course, are self-explanatory. I don't think we need to add anything in here to describe what they're for. So how are we going to use these two variables? Well, we're going to use them in pretty much the same manner that we're using our horizontal timer and our vertical timer if statements. Basically, we're going to add in another saying if. Actually, let's put this one before the horizontal timer. So if button down wait timer is less than button down wait max, then we increment the button down wait timer by time.delta time, and we return. Okay. So basically, same thing. Nothing happens unless the button down wait timer reaches button down wait max. Okay. And here we're going to go ahead in our get key up if statement. We're going to go ahead and set our button down wait we're going to set our button down wait timer equal to 0, okay? Because we want to make sure that when the player releases the key, that the amount of time that the button's been waiting is basically reset to 0, okay? All right. So now we want to take this if statement, copy it, and also put it into our left arrow if statement, okay? And we also want to paste it into our down arrow. It's right here. Okay. So that's it. So now, when we play the game, the tetramino piece should actually wait like a split second, maybe even shorter than a split second before it starts moving. So I'm going to press the key now, and see how there was just a little delay. Okay. So now the problem lies with the fact that we can only move the piece if we're actually holding down the button. Because if we're just going left and right, nothing happens. Because we're not holding the button down long enough for it to say, oh, the piece should move. Well, we need to add something in here to give us back our immediate movement that we've had before, right? Because we may just want to move the piece just one unit instead of moving it continuously, right? So we want an immediate movement to happen when we press the button. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to add two more variables. And we're going to call these, let's go ahead and jump back into our tetramino script. These two variables are going to be privates, and they're going to be booleans, and we're going to call them moved immediate horizontal. We're going to set that equal to false, and the other one is going to be called moved immediate vertical, and we're going to set that to false as well. Right? So the way we're going to use these, and let's just go ahead and jump right into our if statement for the get key up. We're going to go ahead and reset our moved immediate horizontal to false and moved immediate vertical also to false. So the whole problem, okay, this right here is what's keeping our piece from moving. So if we're just pressing the key once, then we want our piece to move. So how do we know if we only press the key once? Well, what happens is when we press the right arrow key, this if statement is checking to see if we did. And if we did, then we can say, hey, we want the piece to move just once, okay? But we still want, we don't want any of this to happen if we only move it once. We only want this to happen if we hold the key down, okay? So here's what we can do. We can say if moved immediate horizontal, okay? So basically we're saying if that's true, here, let's go ahead and align this, then we want to do this, okay? So that means that we've already moved immediately, but we're still holding down the button, okay? So, and here we're going to need to add in something. So we're going to do if not moved immediate horizontal, then we're going to set moved immediate horizontal to true. Simple, right? Because if we haven't immediately moved, so if we haven't pressed the key, then we're going to set moved immediate to horizontal to true, right? So then at the next frame update, moved immediate horizontal is true if we're still holding down the button. And if we are still holding down the button, then this stuff should happen. And nothing else is going to happen here because moved immediate horizontal is still true, right? So it's not going to keep getting set to true because it's definitely not false. Until, of course, we let go of our key and then moved immediate horizontal is set to false, right? So, pretty simple. So now all we got to do is we got to add that into our to left arrow, right? So we're going to do the same thing. If moved immediate horizontal, set that in, close that. If not moved immediate horizontal, and moved immediate horizontal equals true. Okay. And we're going to do the same thing for down, which is right here. If moved immediate vertical, like that. If not moved immediate vertical, and moved immediate vertical equals true. Okay. So now with that, save it, play the game. And there we go. We can move immediately left and right by pressing the arrow keys. And we can also move when we hold down the button for continuous movement. Yep, everything is working pretty good. Okay, so that is pretty much it. All right, so the next tutorial is probably going to include the preview window for viewing the next piece that's going to come down. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you guys soon.